We are constantly bombarded with content advice that feels generic, overwhelming for sure, and not customized to the unique humans that we are. I personally have felt the pressure to show up on all the platforms, and sometimes that pressure has made me just not show up on any of them. I feel like there were times in the past where I didn't know where to start, and I was worried that I would get a wind of inspiration and maybe post for a week or something like that, and then life would happen and my consistency would fizzle out, and it would feel like something I had failed at. And I don't think it's a coincidence that I work with a lot of people who are ideas people who like to start a lot of projects and talk about their ideas, but sometimes I have a little bit harder time following through. I've definitely felt that way all throughout my first couple chapters of my career. And I think this narrative of like posting and not being consistent and then dropping off was extra painful for me because I just didn't want it to add to a narrative that was already not super kind to myself, which was that I didn't know how to stick with things. So it's only recently that I've been able to really create a regular content and sharing rhythm for myself. So even though I'm sharing this episode with you all, I'm trying to almost walk you through the steps of things that I've recently learned. Not that I'm a total expert at, but I think sometimes we just need to be a couple steps ahead in order to share the route that we've taken. So I'll tell you how I was able to figure out how to create that regular rhythm for myself in this episode. So stick with me and listen in. So, how do you share your work in a way that feels authentic, not salesy, not cheesy, not attention grabby? And how do you know which platforms to be on? How often should you post and should you schedule things in advance? Right? These are really common questions and fears that people have. I think this whole content strategy topic is super common. I hear about it all the time with clients in my one-on-one coaching and in my business incubator launch lab. People are confused and tired of social media and all the changing advice and algorithms. It feels like people are saying, you have to be on Instagram, even though I don't want to. Wait a second, actually, maybe TikTok is where we should be. Uh, you need to send a weekly newsletter. You should definitely start a podcast, right? Like, as I'm saying this, you might hear a chorus of different shoulds that fly around that you've heard about what you should do. And it can all be very exhausting, especially when it doesn't feel like it's aligned with who you are and how you naturally communicate. But it also feels like the main way to run a business, to get eyeballs on you and your service so that you can actually make a living, is to show up on social media or share your work somewhere. So, what do we do? We're between a rock and a hard place. So, I don't mean to paint a super dark picture, right? Let's not despair and give up just yet. I do think that there's a way to get really clear about what your style and approach are in a way that will actually work for your personality, your lifestyle, and your business goals. You just need to do a little self-inquiry and clarity work to figure it out. And that is what we are here to do today. So today I want to walk you through what I call your authentic sharing style. It is a personalized approach to sharing your work that builds connection without burning you out or giving you the kind of major vulnerability hangovers that we all dread. I want to start with talking about why. Why would we even dare share our work in the first place? If it's uncomfortable, why do this? I think it's always helpful to start with the reason so that we can feel all the more motivated to get over some of our blockers. Getting clear on your why is going to help you be both strategic, but also motivated throughout the rest of the content strategy design phase. If you don't know why you're doing it, then why would you do it? So when I ask people why they want to share their work, I hear things like, I want to get more clients. I want to make more sales. I want to be known. I want to build a reputation in my field. I want to connect with my people. I want to connect with people who might benefit from what I do. I want to tell my story. I want to have my voice be heard. I want to tell my stories to people who want to hear them. I think all of these are very valid reasons, but the key is knowing your specific why. You might have resonated with all of the examples that I just gave, but even doing a bit of prioritization work and figuring out which of these reasons sits at the very top can help you think about what success metrics to look at and how to maybe even shape your strategy. So, for example, if you're primarily sharing to get clients, your approach is going to be different than if you're sharing to build community. If you are sharing to establish a reputation, the content that you create will have a different approach than if you're trying to find collaborators. So take a moment to think about your core reasons for sharing. What are you hoping will happen as a result? As a quick aside, I do think that no matter what you say is your specific reason for sharing your work, I really believe that we humans have a desire to be known, to be validated, seen, witnessed by other people. And while, of course, we can do that in our IRL life, with our family, with our closest people who, are hopefully already love us and appreciate us, I think that there is something around just like a basic human desire for being witnessed that sharing your work plays into. So even if you might feel a little humble and reticent to admit that you would like other people to know about what you're doing, I guess I just want to normalize and validate that this desire feels very like prevalent and very understandable and very human to me. Your internal clarity should help give you a filter as you come across different content advice out there. So if someone tells you, you should be on LinkedIn because it's an untapped platform, right? But if your goal is to connect with creative peers and your creative peers are not on LinkedIn, then you can confidently disregard that advice. When I think about myself as an example, I think I want to share because I do want to have people know about me and what I do, what I offer. And ideally, they will want to form some kind of relationship with me where they are tuned into my podcast, subscribe to my newsletter, or even reach out about becoming a client or joining my business incubator launch lab. I also feel like sharing my podcast is a way to share what I think I'm good at, which is facilitating good conversation and making connections with someone's core themes. It makes me feel good sharing this gift with my podcast guests and the people listening. And I hope that it inspires other people to find work that is meaningful for them. That's you. You, the listener out there. I am talking about you. I've also done my own work around understanding my purpose and hosting a podcast that helps people believe in their unique value is 100% aligned with that purpose. So I kind of knew that starting a podcast, even if, a million people didn't start following it, it was going to be worthwhile to me because I enjoy the process. I was making relationships along the way, and I felt like it was supporting my greater purpose. So, as you can hear from my list of reasons, it's not just about one thing, and it's definitely motivated by personal reasons, but they do bridge thinking about myself and caring for others. I'll come back to my own set of reasons later when we talk about how to design an actual content strategy that fits your why. But before we move on, I want to address arguably one of the most important things to acknowledge and face around this topic: fear. Because sharing your work or your story or any bid for attention can feel vulnerable and sometimes scary. If you don't feel scared at all about sharing and this whole fear thing doesn't resonate with you, then you're amazing, awesome. Just skip ahead to the next section. But I think for most of us humans, we do experience some level of trepidation around the vulnerability of sharing our work. So I want to cover some of the most common fears that I see stopping awesome people from putting themselves out there. I'm going to walk through each one and offer a different way to look at it that might help you relate to that fear in a different way. I don't promise that sharing will immediately feel easy once you reframe these fears. I know it's not as simple as that, but I think the process starts with what thoughts we entertain. And if we truly do have important goals that require sharing about our work, then we benefit from paying more attention to the constructive thoughts that make sharing less painful, as opposed to the ones that keep us small or hidden away. So the first big fear might be obvious. It's judgment and criticism. It's a fear that people will think that your work isn't good enough, ultimately, that you are not good enough, that they will leave mean comments, or maybe even worse, they'll just ignore you completely and you're not going to get any sort of signal back. I see this fear of judgment and criticism as sort of an overarching umbrella fear. A lot of like sub fears lie underneath it. So I think if we go a layer deeper, we benefit by asking ourselves, what are we really afraid of? What like specific kind of criticism? Are we afraid of being untalented, of people thinking that we are stupid, mediocre, of being trite or disingenuous? So if you're really able to tap into what I call your lizard brain and really try to listen to what it's squawking about, I think you're going to hopefully hear what flavor of fear of criticism is the most loud for you. I know it's not comfortable to hear because it usually points to one of our biggest insecurities. But I do think being brave enough to being curious about what it is about can be really helpful to know how to talk to the fear and ultimately to soothe it, to calm yourself around it. So here's an example. I had a client, a music artist and producer who was feeling afraid to share her work online because she was just really afraid of being criticized. And when she finally started posting her pieces, she was surprised to find that like a lot of people actually didn't criticize her. She got some nice comments and she actually got some helpful feedback that helped her improve. She did get a few negative comments, but they didn't sting as much as she thought they would. So much of her resistance to showing up and share, like the years that she just kind of hid away, like it was really because of this fear of a few negative comments on every post, or I don't know. I think she was just making it up to be this big, big thing. And so once it actually happened, once she got a few negative comments and she survived and she was fine, it was a really empowering moment for her to realize that like this fear didn't own her. She reminded herself that she was looking for her people. And actually, it because she had not posted for a long time, the old set of followers were not really feeling like her people anymore. She had redefined her style and sound, and she knew she was looking for a new audience. And so the only way she was going to keep connecting to that new audience, growing relationships with her people, was to keep showing up, right? And the haters essentially were not her people. So the reframe here is that for her, maybe is sharing connects me to the right people who value my perspective and what I've created, and everybody who doesn't like it is just not my person, right? So that's a specific example. Yours is going to sound a little bit different, but I want to just share an example of what a fear in a reframe can sound like. The second fear is imposter syndrome, that fear that you are not qualified enough to share about your topic, or that somehow people are going to find out that you've been tricking them and you are actually not worth their time or their trust. I see this as related to the first fear, right? There's a fear of judgment for not being knowledgeable or experienced enough. This is the particular flavor that has to do with like being skilled or an expert of some kind. And I do want to distinguish between the kind of imposter syndrome that shows up when you have many years of experience under your belt versus the kind of discomfort of being new at something. I think a lot of beginners conflate and confuse imposter syndrome with just kind of like being a beginner. If you're worried about showing up as more experienced than you are versus just owning confidently that you are skilled, but still early in this particular chapter of your business or what you're offering, that is a different feeling than being an imposter after many, many, many years of experience. So I just want to normalize that if you're doing something new, even if you're mid or late career, it's still going to feel uncomfortable because it's new. I think that there's this stretch zone where you feel a little healthy discomfort about how you're sharing about what you do, but you're not stretching yourself or the truth so far that you feel like you are being disingenuous, right? That you're lying. So, for example, someone new into their design consulting business could just present themselves as a very experienced designer by saying something like, I'm taking on a select number of clients, or with a decade of experience, I offer design consulting. And that could be true about their career, but not about their consulting business, or an even more transparent version of talking about how they're open to new clients could be something like, I am excited to have just opened up my design consultancy practice and I am taking on new clients. So you can hopefully see the different stance, the different posturing that someone's doing with these examples. Find out what your stretch zone feels like. You can even write different drafts of an announcement, one kind of pretending that you're further along than you are, one kind of downplaying your expertise, and then experiment and find some different points along that spectrum and see which one feels like the stretch zone. Sometimes people actually respond quite well to being in process. Like an audience can be built around the vulnerability of sharing your own learning journey. I know a coach who started documenting her own journey of building her business from scratch. She wasn't pretending to be super experienced. She was just openly sharing what was working, what wasn't, what she was learning along the way. And she built a audience of people who really related to her honesty, other people who were either interested in becoming coaches themselves or just found value in learning with her. So it's definitely possible to gain an audience by being forthright about how much of a beginner you are. So I'd say to those who feel the itch of the imposter syndrome or being a beginner, I want to offer you this reframe. Even if you're new to this particular chapter of your career or business, it doesn't mean that you're totally new. We can always feel behind other people who are ahead of us, but it's harder to see that we actually know a lot more about our field or subject. We tend to kind of compare to someone who's ahead of us versus, a step behind us. And when you share your process, your questions, your evolution, you're not just establishing yourself as an expert, but you're making your work accessible and relatable. And I think there's a way to be forthright about where you are in your career chapter that can instill confidence. You can be confident while still saying, I'm new. I think that whether it's through writing or speaking, that people can really tune into genuine confidence. And so if you can work on confidently being a beginner, people are going to feel that and still respond positively. All right, moving on. The third fear is about privacy and oversharing. I think some of us conflate being authentic with the idea that we need to share everything, our personal lives, our struggles, all the behind the scenes messiness. And some of us are really uncomfortable with that. Some of us do not want to share every little snippet of our life. I felt conflicted about this personally because I feel like I have a side of myself that is really an open book, and I really like to share freely about my thoughts and feelings. But I also have a distaste for people sharing every mundane thing that they do. And I happen to be married to a partner who is pretty conscious of privacy. So finding my kind of comfort spot around sharing nothing to sharing everything was a little bit of a process for me. And especially when I had my daughter, I realized that the grand majority of photos on my phone were of her and our family. And I decided that I didn't want to share her face publicly. So it made me wonder, like, what else do I have to share about my life? Especially because my coaching business is pretty, it's not super visually dynamic. It's me on Zoom most of the time. And I felt like a lot of people with 1 million followers were showing behind the scenes of their family life. And I wondered how I would ever get interest from people if I didn't show, my up close and personal home life. I think I was in need of some examples of people who had attracted a following without sharing a lot about their personal life and to see some points along that spectrum in between. So, could I share some parts of my personal life but keep some parts out? One model or example comes to mind. I have a friend who runs a successful spiritual coaching business, and she shares almost nothing about her personal life. Her content is focused entirely on her insights and her spiritual teachings for others. She writes a little bit about her career and her upbringing, but really her social media presence is largely just focused on shedding light on nature, on healing messages, and encouragement to be your unique creative self. And it works. She's built deep connections with her audience without revealing details about her family, her home, or her personal struggles. So after I looked around and saw my friend as an example, I felt like it was really nice to see how you could have a personable tone. Her voice really comes through in her writing. So you feel like you know her, but she doesn't show you about her personal life. So maybe you could kind of bop around to different people that you follow or places that you show up online and see how they're sharing and see which level of openness resonates with you. The reframe here is that you get to choose your own boundaries and share what feels right for you in your own comfort zone. Authenticity is not about sharing everything, it's about being genuine and about what you choose to share. So don't be pressured to share what you ate for breakfast. Okay. All right. The fourth and the last big fear I see is about inconsistency and burnout. It is about the pressure to show up perfectly and consistently and constantly, right? There's this idea that if you're not posting every day, sending newsletters every week, and generally being omnipresent, that you will disappear from people's consciousness. One of my recent podcast guests, Smiley, he shared about how he's really trying to focus on a few really good pieces of content a year instead of playing the hamster wheel game of trying to keep up with the ongoing thirst for new content. So instead of feeling pressure to make something new every week, he thinks about really just like 1 or 2 pieces of quality content a year. When I'm reminded that you can take a high quality idea and continue to share it many times and in new ways because it has this evergreen quality to it, I feel so much relief that I don't have to keep creating more. And that if I really want to keep up a consistent cadence of sharing, then I can schedule my sharing out so it doesn't take over my life. I do think that, like with any kind of relationship building, that staying within people's line of sight can make it so that they don't forget you and that it kind of warms the relationship. But if what they see is uninspired, if it's like half baked and if it's just like low quality, then I don't think that version of showing up is really going to be doing you any favors. So the reframe here is that sustainable sharing that you can actually maintain is always better than perfection that you cannot sustain. So now that I've covered some of the top fears that I hear, I'm curious which ones felt the most applicable to you. Which one were you thinking to yourself, like, oh, yes, that is me? As you think about your content strategy, think about how this particular fear might be holding you back and try on a reframe to see if it helps you move forward. And like literally try to do some writing on this. Write out the fear, write the reframe, and keep drafting the reframe until you get it to a version where when you read it, you're like, ah, that pacifies me. That like soothes me, makes me feel better. That is the sign that you have successfully created a reframe that's going to work. Now let's talk about your unique strengths when it comes to not just creating content, but creating connection. So think about the mediums that come most naturally to you. How do you communicate your ideas most potently? Are you a visual person? Do you find it easy to communicate with images, graphics, or video? Do you have an eye for aesthetics and design? Are you someone who likes to write? Do you express yourself best through the written word? Maybe crafting thoughtful articles or letters or even captions and descriptions works well for you. Are you comfortable on camera or speaking? Maybe you sense that there's something energizing or magnetic about your energy. Do you shine in conversations and interviews or when you explain concepts out loud? And if you're honest, do you think that you are particularly charismatic or memorable in the way that you emote? That is all a good sign that you're going to be pretty good on camera. And another format, I guess, is being more interactive, engaging in conversation and dynamics in real time. Maybe you thrive in workshops, live sessions, or anywhere where it's not just you talking at a camera, but you are in some way in a kind of relationship or dynamic with another person or group. So these are just a few main categories, right? Visuals, written word, kind of live on camera, and then being more interactive. Start with the mediums that feel the most natural to you. You can always develop skills in new areas over time, but when you're just first starting to show up and establish a sharing practice, I think it makes a lot of sense to just play to your strengths. Like, why not? It'll make everything easier. For example, if you freeze up on camera but write beautiful emails, why torture yourself with Instagram reels when you could be building an amazing newsletter? Or maybe you are a natural on video but find writing painful. So why force yourself to blog when you could be creating engaging YouTube content? And maybe you can even like use AI to help you write what you need to. I'm not saying that you should just always do what's easy. I know that, growth is so important. Of course, I do as a coach. Growth happens when we get out of our comfort zone. But what I'm saying is that your content strategy can be built on a foundation of your natural strengths with intentional stretching into new territory as you're ready, as you gain strength and momentum. But start with what you're already naturally good at. For me, I feel like the most positive feedback I have received has been about being in conversation with people. It's about how do I interview people, my ability to draw connections in a conversation. And I also get compliments for my writing skills. So even before I started a podcast, I had many people tell me that I should have one, which was very flattering. So whether it was because they liked my voice or the way I moved a conversation along, I don't know why, but I just kind of heard enough of those pieces of feedback that it started to coalesce, and I thought, wow, I could really be good at a podcast. And on the flip side, right, no one was complimenting me on my photography skills or my ability to put together compelling graphics. I hired out a brand designer who did my illustrations because I knew that visual communication is really just not my strongest suit. So it should have made sense to me earlier to do a podcast and to center that and long form writing versus leaning heavily into a visual platform like Instagram. But it still took me a little time to realize where to focus my efforts and how the podcast could really be the heartbeat of my content system. It took me some time, and I hope that you don't beat yourself up if you haven't found your clear winning medium yet or found the right form for it. These things take time, and even listening to this podcast episode might help you get more clear. So just keep tuning into feedback that you're getting from others and from doing. Okay, so let's say you do know which communication medium that you're the strongest in. The next piece of the puzzle is to understand your audience, your people. Where do they hang out and what do they respond to? This is where I see a lot of people go wrong. They choose platforms based on what is trendy or what worked for someone else without truly considering whether their ideal clients or community members are there. So ask yourself, where do your people naturally spend their time? Are they on Instagram? Are they reading more in-depth articles on Substack? Are they hanging out in Facebook groups? Are they like anti-social media and just really trying to show up in person? If you don't know the answer to this question, that is totally okay. It just means that you need to do a little bit more digging, some research to figure it out. You can survey people that represent your ideal client. I did that. I think I sent a survey to my existing clients and asked them things like, which platforms do you tend to use, or which kinds of people do you tend to follow? And I just really tried to use the channels that I had available to me to learn about my target client. So once you get a little bit more clear, the answer to this question about where your audience hangs out should heavily influence your platform choices, because you can create the most amazing content in the world, but if you're sharing it in places where your people don't go, it's kind of like throwing a party that no one really knows where it is, right? You're going to have a lot of potential, but not actual connection. So for me, I learned that I was not that great at visuals, but a lot of my clients are. So what was I supposed to do? I think instead of shunning Instagram altogether, I thought, okay, maybe there's a version of this that I can do. And so I choose to do clips of my podcast, and I use kind of other people's illustrations that I choose that speak to me. And I also used kind of text heavy posts, carousels, things like that. But that was my way of trying to still show up in a place that my ideal client hangs out, but do it in my own way. The sweet spot is finding the overlap between platforms that align with your content creation strengths and where your audience spends their time. Now that we've covered where to share and the main mediums to share, let's talk about your approach. So another way to say that is sort of like your style, your brand voice. This is kind of more like the what. What do you actually share? What is the content tone? This is what I'm going to refer to as your approach style. So I've noticed 5 distinct approach styles that tend to resonate with different personality types. So as you listen, try to think about if any of these apply to you. And this is not exhaustive, right? So there's probably plenty of other types. I'm always curious to hear other ones. So if you want to send me a little note of the type that you think that you are that I didn't cover here, please do. First, I'm going to cover one called the connector. This is someone who's really just great at building connection and community. They make introductions to people. They bring people together through gatherings. Their content usually highlights other people, shows a lot of faces, facilitates discussions, and I think it's a great style for those who feel uncomfortable directly in the spotlight and feel a lot more at ease when it comes to shining the light on other people. Then there's the thought provoker. This is someone who's really good at coming up with ideas that strike a chord with people, or even as the title suggests, provoke or kind of make the viewer uncomfortable because they are challenging the status quo in some way. Maybe they're asking deep questions, offering fresh perspectives, or bringing things together in a way that makes us pause and really consider. Their content usually makes people think, engage intellectually, and I think this is great for people who like the idea of leading and inspiring in the realm of ideas and ideals. The next type is the uplifter. They're focused on providing encouragement and creating content that is really inspirational and motivating. They are naturally positive, and their enthusiasm tends to be pretty contagious. They make you feel like you are the hero, not them. And I think these uplifters really tap into our desires and dreams and make us feel like what we want is possible. This is great for people who feel naturally encouraging, and also if any part of your business is about sort of, yeah, lifting up other people. The next type is the demonstrator. This is a show, not tell approach. You can be sort of like a teacher on the one hand, or you can also be a process lover on the other, giving behind the scenes peeks into your process, creating content that really educates through example. These are people who tend to be great at breaking down complex concepts and showing their work in action. So you don't really have to say much, I guess, unless you want to narrate in a very verbal way about what you're doing, but you can also demonstrate like physically, especially for people who are crafting or creating something that they can just take a video of all the different stages of it. And these demonstrators build a kind of intimacy by letting you into the part of their world that is unscripted, unpolished, sometimes raw, unedited. This is great for people who would rather do something than talk about it, and people who really tend to celebrate the process of their work. I think this is also great for people who feel like they are natural teachers. They're able to break things down into steps, so it's approachable and accessible. And finally, the storyteller is someone who can really communicate well through narrative. They share their personal journey sometimes. They can use stories to connect emotionally with their audience. So, most people by now, I think, have heard the importance of storytelling, how people remember stories. They really tap into some sort of framework that we humans like grew up learning. And a storyteller excels at understanding how to tap into empathy, how to get other people to root for them, and even how to tap into people's love of drama, right? This can come in the form of vulnerability, creating relatable content that resonates, or even a more theatrical person who knows how to hook your attention, create suspense, and keep you wanting to learn what happened next. So, which of these sharing approach styles feel like you? The connector, the thought provoker, the uplifter, the demonstrator, or the storyteller? None of these approaches are better than the others. It's just that they each are different ways of connecting authentically. And the key is recognizing which style or combination of styles feels the most natural to you. When you align your sharing with your natural approach style, it won't feel forced or performative. It's going to feel like you're simply having a conversation in the way that you would naturally. So now that we've covered the why share, the fears that come up, the blockers, your strengths in terms of which mediums you're good at communicating in, your audience and where they're hanging out, and your approach style, let's put it all together. Your authentic sharing style is where all these elements converge. It's content that serves your specific goals, plays to your natural strengths, reaches your people where they are, and expresses your unique voice. To find this sweet spot, I recommend starting small and specific. Don't try to be everywhere or do everything. Choose one platform and one content type that feels aligned, and then commit to a sustainable cadence. Maybe that is weekly for you, maybe that's monthly, but be realistic about what you think you can actually maintain. And I would even say, like, take your expectations and bring it down a notch. So, for example, if I think that I can do it weekly, then I might say, like, I'm going to try once every 10 days. And that way, I'm going to try to set myself up for some early wins and build some momentum and self-confidence so that I can keep, playing with that cadence level as I build trust with myself. As you continue to share consistently in this focused way, I hope you can pay attention to what feels energizing versus depleting, right? Like, notice which content resonates with your audience, how people are responding, and be willing to experiment and adjust. As I've been doing more posting lately, I realize that I have a lot of energy when it comes to editing my podcast. I love choosing the excerpts and the quotes, but then actually putting them into the posts, formatting them in Canva or whatever I'm using to put them up, like all of that just feels so energy draining to me. And I'm actually in the process of trying to outsource that work so that I don't have to do it. So that's just my own little snippet of a learning that I'm paying attention to what energizes me and what depletes me. And I'm trying to adjust my whole content sharing system accordingly. If you don't have an audience yet, I think you can just tune into how it feels for you to create it. You don't need to really worry about what resonates with your people yet. But I hope that what you're taking away from this episode is that there's no one size fits all approach to sharing. What works for someone else just might not work for you. And that's not just okay. It's exactly as it should be, right? We can't be everywhere at once. We just can't. So I'm really glad that you're taking this time to be thoughtful and intentional. The most powerful sharing strategy is one that feels authentic to you, one that you can sustain over time without burning out, one that connects you to the right people, and one that feels like a natural extension of who you are and the work that you do in the world. I hosted a workshop on this very topic recently, and one concern came up that I wanted to touch on briefly before we start to wrap up today. The concern was that this world is already really noisy, and like, are we just adding noise? And I totally think that that is a valid question. I think that the alternative of not sharing anything makes me sad because I, again, kind of going back to what I said at the beginning of the episode, I think that we really benefit from feeling seen and witnessed. And so for you, that might be just figuring out how to share IRL and not on social media. But I think the idea of like, there's room for me, that was something that came out of my podcast with my cousin Janet a couple episodes ago. Her wisdom to say, like, why not me? There's room for me. I do think there is room for all of our voices. And I truly believe that each and every one of us has something different to say because we are our unique selves. So, yes, the world is noisy, but like the alternative of silencing yourself doesn't feel great to me. So, like, why not you? I think there can be room for you. Another rebuttal of sorts to the concern that you are just adding noise is that if you truly feel like you are trying to help others, if you feel like you're creating some sort of value, then you are not just adding noise, you're adding value. So I think there is a discernment piece here where if you create something that feels like kind of fluff and doesn't have a lot of thoughtfulness into it, doesn't really feel like it's of service to your ideal client or customer, then maybe it is noise. And maybe you want to think about like rewriting it or reframing something to be of more value than what you've written. Okay, before I wrap up, I want to offer a few quick practical tips. Again, first start with a content calendar that is realistic for you. You can always increase frequency as you build the habit, but try to set yourself up for that early win. So you can do that by setting a goal that feels very doable. And once you complete that successfully, then do it again and again, and then add on from there. The second is this reminder that you can always repurpose your content across platforms. One thoughtful, high quality piece can be adapted for multiple channels with less extra effort. So, this one's hard for me because as someone who really loves new ideas, I have to really remind myself that I already have like a treasured chest of value that I've already created, and I can go back to there and still see what's valuable and still share that with others. And finally, remember that consistency beats frequency. So it is better to show up reliably on a less frequent schedule than to post in sort of like unpredictable bursts and just disappear for, forever, for months at a time. So, but if you can't be consistent all the time, it doesn't mean that you're not good at this or should stop sharing your work. And, it just means that you're human. So give yourself some slack. All right. That's all I have for you today on finding your authentic sharing style. I hope this helps you remember that you don't have to listen to all the shoulds about how to shape your content. You get to choose what feels genuinely aligned with you. If you enjoyed this podcast, I would really appreciate you leaving a review for me because I am a baby podcaster right now. I've really enjoyed doing this over the past few years, but I haven't really thought about how to spread the reach. And I know that reviews really instill confidence and trust in someone who might be a prospective listener. So if you have 30 seconds and feel compelled to help someone out, I would so appreciate a review of Coherence Podcast. Thank you so much.